Get lumped up tonight. Listen to Rob Rossi and Rocknroll. On the only podcast that I'll hear that won't make me wanna rip off my ears. Oh, the Rock Show, the Rock Show, the Rock Show, the Rock Show, the Rock Show. The Rock Show, oh, I want the Rock Show. The Rock Show, 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 the Rock Show. I want the Rock Show. Let's get them.
Hello, people, and welcome to another exciting rock show. And today's episode is a special one. Mike is going to give us 10 albums that you need to hear before you die. This is episode 1, and we're going to have 5 albums. And what 5 albums are we talking about right now, Mike?
Okay, well, the way we're doing this for July is we're doing it over 2 parts. 10 albums I picked out that I feel are very important if you're a rock and roll fan to hear. Some of these albums you may have heard of, you may have even heard them, but I would assume probably most of these you're not that familiar with. So I don't underestimate the audience; they probably know about them. Basically, we're going to do 5 today, and then 5 in the next episode. They're not in any particular order. None are better than the other. Not going on a chart from 10 to 1. It's just 10 albums I think everybody should give a listen to at least once. The first one we're talking about today is the Rolling Stones' Satanic Majesties Request album. Okay, that's the cover right there. This album, I feel, is very important in the whole era of the 60s, and even going forward. It's just a very unique album from a band that really never got into psychedelia too much. This is a psychedelic album, or their attempt at it. This is a band that was always blues based, R&B based, rock and roll based, Chuck Berry, that kind of stuff, especially in this era in the 60s. And they made this strange turn in January of 67 to try to record something. Some people say it's in response to the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper, but
I totally think that's what it is.
Well,
I don't think it was a response, but I think they just wanted to copy that thing, because band tends to copy certain gender. They probably wanted to do their own version of Dr. Pepper. Make it better. I mean,
Sgt. Pepper, not Dr. Pepper.
Sgt. Pepper. They wanted to make a better version of Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah.
So
the reason I say that I don't think that was their original reason for this album is because they started recording this album in January of 67. It was right after Between the Buttons came out. Okay, which was an album that also is interesting and kind of different than other things they've done. But they started recording it in January of 67, and the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper didn't come out until June. So and then they released this album finally in December. It took them all year to record this album, which was not the way they usually worked.
No, they're pretty quick.
They were pretty quick. They were very prolific, putting out a couple albums a year, EPs, things like that. We did a show about the making of this already, but I'm going to give a little background on it just so everybody gets where I'm coming from. This is the first album that was produced entirely by the band, and that was because their manager / producer, Andrew Loog Oldham, had quit during the making of this record. There was a lot of problems at this time in the Stones. There was drug busts. There was a lot of sort of infighting in the band. everybody kind of had their own little entourage going on. A lot of drug taking, a lot of hallucinogenics and other things was starting at this time. The working title for the record was actually called Cosmic Christmas.
Yeah.
Okay, which is kind of funny. But they ended up taking the title based on what was written on British passports back in the day. I'm not sure if it's still the same, but back on a British passport in those days, it said Her Britannic Majesty Requests and Requires. And it was just something that you saw on the passport. So they came up with, their Satanic Majesties Request.
Ain't it funny that the Beatles and these guys did like almost like identical almost album? How like did they have spies on each other's side that they made like the same kind of album? How did they know that the Beatles were making that album? And how did the Rolling Stone know that? How did the Beatles they know the Rolling Stone would make an album like that?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I think that obviously the bands were friends. Okay, despite the media liking to portray them as rivals, they really weren't. Okay, the Stones and the Beatles got along very well. I know John Lennon, hung out with the Stones and things like that. They would, Brian Jones was friends with all of them. Mick Jagger. I think that it just was a period like this kind of like timepiece for that year is we're going to do something that's psychedelic. Okay.
Maybe the acid was
Jimi
good.
Hendrix, what's that?
Maybe acid was very good then.
They were all doing the same acid. It's very possible. Okay. But even in so it is a psychedelic record, but it's different than Sgt. Pepper in so many ways. I actually prefer it to Sgt. Pepper. That I'm sure I'll get heat for saying that. I just find it more interesting because it's such a unique record for the Stones. It featured a 3D style album cover. You put it up there for a second. It was called a lenticular picture. And if you notice, keep that up for a second, Rob. If you notice, you have the picture in the middle, and then you have the blue border. The Stones wanted it to be no blue border. They wanted it to be just that picture, the whole album cover in 3D. Turned out to be too expensive. They had to make it a little bit smaller to make it fit their budget.
Yeah.
In those days, they weren't the multi-billionaires they are now. Okay, so it's an interesting album cover. You got Jagger sitting in the middle. It's kind of almost occultish in a way. Okay, there's like a moon symbol on his hat. If you looked at this record when you bought it with the lenticular 3D cover, when you turned it a little bit, it looked like the pictures were kind of like their faces were kind of turning with you. So it's kind of but Jagger's face never changes. It's always looking straight ahead. So the band began recording the album, like I said, in January of '67, right after Between the Buttons. But due to a lot of court appearances and some short jail terms during that time and a lot of other problems, they never really recorded it entirely as a band. It was the band was never in the studio at the same time, which is it creates like a disjointed kind of feel to the record. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for this album, but it just wasn't the way that they usually recorded. And they were bringing large entourages with them, which was something that Oldham had a problem with. He saw them going down a road. He didn't want anything to do with them anymore. And, they would eventually go to Alan Klein, and there would be problems there as well with their management. Now, Bill Wyman, the bass player, was particularly annoyed when he made this record. He wrote the song In Another Land, which was the single that was released off the album, and he actually sings it. It's kind of a parody on what was going on at the time. There was just, he felt like he was in another land. Okay. Bill was not into psychedelics. He didn't like acid, things like that. And it just, he was kind of the outsider at that point, and everybody else was getting involved with these psychedelics.
Hey,
What's
Mike,
it?
I want to bring up one point. So, you know the
Mhm.
song "She's a Rainbow," right?
Mhm.
I always think she's a rainbow with Lucy and the Skies of Diamonds for some reason.
Yeah, you gotta wonder. Did they go into the studio at Sergeant Pepper and see, or did they talk and see, hey, I'm doing a song called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and Mick would write, well, I'm doing She's a Rainbow, you know? And it's just one of those things. I kind of think it's more of a strange coincidence than there's actually something behind it. But who knows? I mean, they really could have been talking to each other. I've never heard that they were, but who knows?
I
Uh,
know, but it was such a strange time. It's not like now with the internet. Everybody, that's what I'm saying. It's so close, but because like it's not like now. Like I can put something online and you see it, and then you'll be like, okay, I'm going to do this, and but then they had to actually talk. So it's very funny that these albums came out at that weird time. So I'm just
yeah.
saying, to me, it might not be a coincidence.
They,
It
they
might have been
weren't they
duping
weren't in the
everybody.
same they weren't in the same studio. Okay, this was
Yeah,
recorded at Olympic in London, and of course the Beatles were in Abbey Road. So
yeah.
it how they come up with similar styles, but they're not really similar.
No,
I
they're different.
There is differences. Like there's
Yeah,
a lot of exotic instruments on Satanic Majesties. Um, Also like future Led Zeppelin bassist John Paul Jones does all the string arrangements on it. Okay. uh Now, when the album was released in December of 67, it got to number 3 in the UK, and it actually got to number 2 in America.
wow.
The song, the single off it, In Another Land, really went nowhere. Okay. And the album was kind of quickly dismissed. It did well, going gold, I believe, right away in America, because they were just so popular. People would just snatch up anything they put out.
Yeah,
But Keith Richards and Mick Jagger to this day say the album was mostly crap, and I tend to differ. I mean, they don't say that about like stuff that came out in the 80s, like, Undercover of the Night. That was crap. Okay. That was just them, phoning it in my opinion. And it's okay. It is still one of my favorite bands. But the track list, real quick, is side one, you had Sing This All Together. Then
yeah,
you had Citadel. Then In Another Land. Then 2000 Man. Sing This All Together, in parentheses, See What Happens. Side two was She's a Rainbow. The
but if you
Lantern.
waited, but with that song also, that last song, that Sing It All and See What Happened.
Yeah.
If you waited to 7:54, you got the Cosmic Christmas.
Cosmic Christmas. Yeah, it was like, I think Bill Wyman saying, "We wish you a Merry Christmas," like that kind of thing.
I think it's
Uh,
funny.
yeah, it is. It is. She's a Rainbow on side two. Then
Yeah,
you have The Lantern, you have Gomper, 2000 Light Years from Home, and on with the show. Um, there's really no other Stones record that sounds like this.
yeah,
Okay. And right after this, they would go right back to their blues based stuff. And they would have like this incredible stretch of Beggar's Banquet to Let It Bleed. Brian Jones would be gone. They'd get Mick Taylor. They would go with Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street, and go into the 70s and continue. And but they dismissed this record. The only songs that they will today still do from it is She's a Rainbow. They
yeah,
occasionally bring that out live. That song has taken a life of its own. It's been in commercials and
yeah,
stuff like that. People kind of forget it comes from this record. The other song that for a while had made a comeback, and I was lucky to see them do it live at the very first tour they ever did it, and that's the song 2000 Light Years from Home, which really is a true psychedelic song, I believe. Okay,
yeah,
from the record. Um, they never were able to do songs from this album live. It was the same problem that the Beatles, well, even though they weren't touring anymore, but like stuff like on Sgt. Pepper could never ever be produced live
Oh
in the way
no.
it sounded. Now, when you see Paul McCartney, he can do it. Okay, you could, he does Eleanor Rigby, he does everything with this mass production in the background. They couldn't do that back in the day. So these songs never really got any live play to their audiences back in the day. But
Yeah.
now they could do it. And during the Steel Wheels tour in 1989, I got to see them do 2,000 Light Years from Home at Shea Stadium. They played several nights in a row. I went one of the nights, and they brought this out for the first time. I remember Jagger saying, we never did this before, and we're giving it a shot, on this tour. I think they've occasionally done it over the years after that, but not regularly.
Mike, you want to hear something funny? I went to that same show.
Did you?
Who did they open up? Who opened up? Because they had some big guys.
Living Colour.
Huh?
Living Colour was the opening act.
I think that's the first time I saw Living Colour too. I was trying to figure it out. Because when I saw that Steel Wheel tour, because there used to be this guy, the Magic Man, that used to come to the bar, and his wife was the one that did all the costume for the Rolling Stones.
Oh,
And he
okay.
told me I got a ticket to see the Rolling Stone, and I was pretty banged up, and we just got on the train. I'm like,
Yeah. I mean, that was one of those most amazing shows I'd ever seen. I'm not a big fan of like giant arena shows, but you could feel Shea Stadium shaking.
but it
Okay.
wasn't. That's not a giant arena. It's a stadium,
Stadium show. Well, I mean, it held 50,000 people. It was sold out for like 5 nights in a row.
Yeah,
So
that was crazy. It was like
yeah.
a crazy. I was like, wow, man, this is 5 nights. I was like, I remember that. And the city, people were getting T-shirts, and the city was just on fire for those.
Well, they hadn't toured. They hadn't toured in about 8 years at that time. They the last time they toured was the Tattoo You tour.
Yeah.
They went through a period where they almost broke up, and Jagger and Richards were fighting, and all that. But just getting back to this album for a second, we'll move on to the next one. Is it just, to me, it holds up as a very just interesting little timepiece from that time. And I think a lot of average Stones fans don't give it much thought. If you're a Stones fanatic like I am, and other people I know, the record. But I think, classic rock doesn't touch it. Okay, you don't hear any of the songs on the radio. Occasionally you might hear She's a Rainbow.
Yeah, you definitely hear She's a Rainbow's probably the one that you hear the most, like
occasionally.
Yeah.
But a lot of the tracks are just kind of like, lost to history a little bit. So that's the first one, number 1. Okay. Number 2, the second album is by the Flaming Groovies, Shake Some Action. Okay, this album came out in 1976. That's the album cover right there. Thank you, Rob. The Flaming Groovies are a great band. They have a huge cult following. This album was their 4th album, and it was their first since 1971's Teenage Head. So they hadn't released an album in 5 years. And there was some changes in the band in that time. Okay, original single Roy Loney was out. They had a different sound on this record. They dropped kind of the blues and rockabilly-ish stuff they were doing for more of a power pop sound that kind of emulated the 1960s British Invasion bands. They even took on a look of the British Invasion bands with matching suits, Cuban-heeled shoes, to give it kind of like a mid-60s, early 60s Beatle-esque, Kinks-esque type of sound. I love this record. I think it's really like the first power pop record, though guys like the Raspberries were doing stuff a couple of years earlier. I think the Flaming Groovies kind of really took that sound and just kind of, shined it like a diamond. They just honed it down to what it should be. And they were signed to Sire Records at the time. And Sire was signing these new bands, part of the punk scene and stuff like that, like the Ramones. And the Flaming Groovies kind of found themselves lumped in with these bands. They also toured with the Pistols and the Ramones, Sex Pistols and the Ramones. It's kind of a reinventing, like I said, of their sound. The track listing is Shake Some Action, Sometimes, Yes It's True, St. Louis Blues, You Tore Me Down, Please Please Girl, Let the Boy Rock and Roll, Don't You Lie to Me, She Said Yeah, I'll Cry Alone, Misery, I Saw Her, Teenage Confidential, and I Can't Hide. 14 perfect songs. Some are covers, okay?
Like Misery, right?
Don't You Lie to Me was I believe a Chuck Berry song made popular by the Stones. But Shake Some Action, the title track, is one of my favorite songs of all time. The guitar sound on that song is incredible. Okay, and it's so fucking catchy that it sticks in your head. Okay, and it just like, I don't know. It's just one of these records that I never get sick of listening to all the way through. I remember Molly at the bar on her playlist. She always had Yes It's True. Okay. And so many times I sat at International listening to that. It's just a great record that I can't emphasize enough. The Flaming Groovies in general are somebody that, some band that everybody should look into. You might have heard of them, but you don't really know too much by them.
Nah. But that album is a solid album. Like if you want to, if you never heard it, you would just go on Apple or something, you could probably get the album, listen, or Spotify, and you could listen to the album and be like, wow, it'll take you to like another place. It's pretty good stuff.
And they're still around. If you have a chance, see them. I caught them right before COVID, I think in 2019. In Manhattan, in like a little like supper club type place I'd never been to before. And they were great. I mean, Cyril Jordan, once Roy Loney left in the early 70s, he took over the band and he took them in that Beatlesque 64 British invasion type of sound, which they would carry on for many years. All right, so the third record we're going to talk about now, I know, Rob, you're a big fan. That's Captain Beefheart's Trout Mask Replica.
Yeah.
Look at that album cover.
Fantastic album.
Fucking fish head with a hat on. All right. This record, I don't know what to say other than it's probably the most avant-garde record ever created in the rock and roll genre. Beefheart is an interesting guy. We did a good show on him a couple of years ago. He was part of like the Frank Zappa crew. Okay. He was on Straight Records. The album was produced by Frank Zappa, but I put him in, even though he's often mentioned in the same sentence with Frank Zappa, totally different than what Zappa was doing. It was more blues based. Okay. But then again, it was totally avant-garde. It's a double record. All right. It's considered Captain Beefheart's greatest accomplishment. Okay. But the album didn't even chart in the United States. Strangely, and for a good thing, it got to number 21 in the UK, which has to be one of the strangest records to ever, hit the top 40 in any country.
Oh yeah.
Let me tell you a little bit about how this went down. Okay.
Even from the record cover, look at that.
Yeah. The band, Captain Beefheart himself was an eccentric person. And the band lived communally for 8 months rehearsing for this album, even before they taped anything. Now, he demanded 14 hours or more of practice from the band every day. It was almost like they were in a cult.
Yeah.
Okay. They were forced to do this, living together. They had no money. They were all on welfare. Okay. Living on food stamps. And even with that, they rarely ate. Okay. there's some discussion as to whether there was serious drug taking going on. I would think there probably was. I know there wasn't a lot of eating going on because they didn't have money for food. But Beefheart demanded, total loyalty and total, you got to practice 14, 16 hours a day. And he wasn't a guy that could easily explain what he wanted from you. Okay, so you had to really pay attention to him. And he tried teaching the band all what he wanted to do on a piano. Okay, and say, hey, I want it to sound like this or like this on piano. But the funny thing is he never played a piano before this record. So it just seems like you had to really get in his head to figure out where he was coming from. The album, it's been called a cacophony of noise. Okay, but you'll listen to it, it's a double album, and you'll realize that there's a method to all this cacophony. All right, and you'll see that it was kind of done on purpose, the way these songs are arranged. Over time, and it didn't take long, it had a cult following pretty much right away. It did go to number 21 in the UK, which brought the Captain Beefheart band over to the UK to perform some of this stuff, which had to be interesting in itself, just to see some of these songs done live. But over the years, artists like John Lydon, who's Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols, even Steve Vai, the great guitarist, John Frusciante, okay, they were all fans of this record just because the whole thing is so out of bounds and out there and just so avant-garde that you just have to listen to it. It's just one of these records that you really got to sit down, spend an hour or so with it. It's a little over an hour. And just listen to it and be like, what the hell am I hearing? How long is it altogether? It's a little over an hour, right?
Yes, definitely. It's the length of the album is 78 minutes.
Yeah, so it's an hour and 18 minutes.
Yeah.
Now, the tracks, it's a double album. Side one, you got a song called Frownland. That goes into The Dust Blows Forward and The Dust Blows Back. Dachau Blues. Dachau was a Nazi concentration camp. Ella Guru. Hair Pie Bake, Part 1. Moonlight on Vermont. Side 2 starts with Pachuco Cadaver. Bill's Corpse. Sweet Sweat Bulbs. Neon Meat Dream of Octofish. China Pig. My Human Gets Me Blues. Dally's Car. Okay, that's side 2. Side 3, Hair Pie, Bake 2. Okay, they call it. Pina, well, when Big Jones spits up or whatever. Fallen Ditch, Sugar and Spikes, and the Ant-Man Bee. Then side 4 is Orange Claw Hammer, Wildlife, She's Too Much for My Mirror, Hobo Chang Box, that's the Blimp, also called Mousetrap Replica, Steal Softly Through Snow, Old Fart at Play, and Veterans Day Poppy. All right, so it's it's something that sounds like it's just out of another planet. Okay?
Let me answer the question. As an album, was this 4 albums? If you were to buy the albums, because it seems like they had it say size 1, size 2, side 3, and side 4. So if you
it was released as a double record, Rob. It just was 2 records in one. So it was a little, double albums are more.
I get it. So it was 2 records, and it had the side 1, side 2, and then the other one has side
3, side 4. That's how double. If you remember, that's how double albums work. And it was expensive to make. Straight Records, which was Zappa's label. Zappa was, very behind Beefheart and what he was doing and supportive, but really couldn't afford to make this record. So
it's
the fact
28 songs, that's a lot of songs.
Yeah. I mean, you have to. It's double the cost. It's a double record. Okay, so you got to pay. And it was more money to pay those to buy those records. So some people were turned off by double albums back in the day. that's something we've talked about a lot. But
Yeah, like
I
George
think they
Harrison
made their
had
money
the
back.
Triple album. Remember?
Well, Triple, I like the Clash, Sandinista, like that. Yeah, that's to me, that's overindulgence. You don't need to do that. It's just too much, you know. But it made its money in England and in the rest of Europe, where it still has a cult status. I think everybody should check out this record before you die.
It's definitely record that you should have.
Yeah. Now, the third one or fourth one, sorry, we're talking about in part one of this episode is we're going to shift gears here and move up a few years to 1982. And it's a punk hardcore band called GBH, which stood for Grievous Bodily Harm out of England.
Yeah.
Okay. GBH is something that you would be charged with if it was kind of like an assault charge if you beat somebody up. And that's the back of it. You got the front. There you go. Yeah. City Babies Attacked by Rats. This is one of my favorite records.
What a title.
Yeah. And this band really is the real deal. They were part of what was called the UK 82 scene. Okay. There was some other bands like Discharge and The Exploited, and that came out of this scene in England. It was kind of like a second generation of punk rock, though these guys did start around 1979 or so. They came out, they were originally from Birmingham, which is where Black Sabbath is from, just so you know. They come out with this it's considered a landmark punk hardcore record. It came out on Clay Records, and it was produced by Mike Clay Stone. And later it came out on Captain Oi Records. It would be re-released on that. This influenced punks, but also it influenced not just the punk scene, but the burgeoning kind of thrash metal scene that Metallica would pioneer. Okay. James Hetfield from Metallica claims GBH, and in particular this album, as a big influence. Also, there's a song that they made called Spit Out the Bone from their album Hardwired to Self-Destruct. And the lyrics were lifted directly from the song on this album called Passenger on the Menu. So, you know, people were listening to this record in the underground. It's I guess about 19 songs or so, right? How many is it all together?
19 songs.
Yeah. And it has touches of, I mean, if you know what punk hardcore sounds like, the songs are short, loud, to the point, and it sounds it's got a little bit of a Motorhead sound to it. You can hear the influences of Motorhead in there. Yeah. Even as well as Black Sabbath, who hailed from the same city. It's 34 minutes of just a sonic blast. Starts with the song Time Bomb, and it ends with their version of Slaughter and the Dogs' Bell End Bop. Okay. Now, it's just a balls out punk rock record that holds up with any of the stuff that came out in the 70s or even after. It's just one of these records that stands the test of time. I think everybody should hear it. The band is still around today. They actually just played New York City at the I believe it was in May. I believe it was. Right? They played the Gramercy. They also played a couple of spots on Long Island. I didn't get to see them this time around, unfortunately, but I've seen them a couple of times over the years. What they do sometimes when they tour now is they'll just concentrate on one album and do the whole album, and then just throw in other tracks. But you know, this album was so influential that the next album was called City Babies Revenge. So they kept the whole City Babies thing going. I love the artwork on the cover. I just love the album. It's just something that I always go back to when I want to listen to some loud punk rock. So finally, on the part one of albums you must hear before you die is a Detroit band. Okay. This band is called The Go. And they made an album called What You Doing that came out on Sub Pop in 1999, Sub Pop Records. Now, who are they? Well, Detroit is a very, you know, it's known for its hard rock music, starting with the Stooges and the MC5, the Rationals, early Bob Seger, Ted Nugent. Okay, Alice Cooper has Detroit roots. Really, just some of the best rock and roll that's ever been created has come out of Detroit. Now, most people think of the the 60s and the 70s, but in the 90s in Detroit, there was a resurgence of really good rock and roll music. And a lot of it came out of what Jack White was doing. Jack White, if you remember, was the lead guitarist and the main dude in the White Stripes. Okay. Now, he was in the band The Go originally. Okay. He would leave them and just concentrate on his White Stripes project, which would make him a household name and a multimillionaire. But originally, The Go started in the mid 90s. Bobby Harlow was on lead vocals. John Krautner was on rhythm guitar. Jack White on lead guitar. Mark Fells on drums, and Dave Buick, like the car, on bass. Now, they were also mentored by LA producer slash songwriter slash Svengali Kim Fowley. Okay. Kim is an interesting cat. I'm sure you heard of him. He started the Runaways, okay, which was just one of his managed them. If you ever saw the Runaways movie, he was crazy. He was hard to work with. The guy had a musical career of his own. He wrote the famous song "Alley Oop" in the late 50s.
Yeah.
Which was about a caveman, and had his own albums. The guy was everything from a DJ to a producer to a manager to just an all around crazy motherfucker. All right, and he mentored this band in the beginning, which I feel is so interesting that they actually got involved with Kim Fowley. But this is a band that should have made it huge, in my opinion. I don't know why they didn't. I picked up on them right when this album came out. It came out in '99, okay? And I think I'm trying to remember. I discovered them through somebody I knew from Detroit, and also just some of the early internet that was out there in '99. I discovered them somehow, and I remember going down to Tower Records, and my friend Keith. Remember my friend Keith? Okay, I believe I was even with him when I bought it, and we just put it on in the car right away, and we're just blown away by this record. It's a very 60s style album. The production on it, 60s in the style of Stooges, MC5, stuff like that. The album is actually recorded a little bit muddy, but it was done on purpose. And I think that some of the critics of it felt it was a badly produced record, but they were trying to go for something of a Detroit sound in the 60s, which sometimes was a little muddy in the production. Now, these are the tracks. It's called Meet Me at the Movies. The album is called What You Doing. First track, Meet Me at the Movies. Summer Sun Blues. Keep on Trash. You Can Get High. It Might Be Bad. Then Susie Don't Leave. Get You Off. Tired of the Night. But You Don't Know. Title track, What You Doing. Then On the Corner. And then Time for... what the hell is that last track? Time for Moving?
Time for the Moon.
Time for the Moon. I have horrible handwriting.
Yeah.
Time for the Moon. Now, this is an album that everybody should hear. It's still out there. You can get it. It's not out of print. In fact, the band in 2019 put out like a 20th anniversary version of the record, which had some outtakes and different versions and stuff like that. They would go on to make a couple more records. They wouldn't really make anything that was as good as this, though everything by them is listenable. I caught them a few times live. They never really disappointed. I don't know where they're at much since they've released the 20th anniversary in 2019. I think the members went on to other things, but I believe they still occasionally play and get together. If you have a chance to see them, it's definitely worth it. But this record, What You Doing, came out in 1999, is the fifth album that you should hear before you die.
Wow, man, that's that list so far. The first 5 albums, pretty damn good. I can't wait for the next episode because this is the end of episode 1, and those are the first 5 albums. And there's no ranking. It's just albums that we talk about. We got 5 more albums coming up, and I think those other albums are damn good also. So
yeah, we're going to talk more about them next week. If you're looking for me, you could find me on social media. On Facebook, I'm called Rocko Mike. Okay, they won't let me be Rocker Mike. Then you could look under the on Facebook, the Rock Show podcast group page with Rocker Mike and Rob Rossi. We're on there every day. Song of the day, song of the night, news, ticket information on stuff. Just little things I put out all day on that site. If you want me on Instagram, I'm Rocker Mike 212. Same for Twitter. I'm also on MeWe, Cloud Hub, Truth Social, Getter, all under Rocker Mike. How about you, Rob?
And me, you can find me on anything getting lumped up on the YouTube, Twitter, the website, and Facebook. So an easy way to reach me is on any of those platforms, and also Instagram. Just look up Getting Lumped Up, and we're all over the place. And Mike, thanks for another great episode. And this is part 1. And
wait till you hear part 2.
Part 2 will be coming out. So people, have a good one.
And remember,
don't get drunk.
Get lumped up. See you in 2 weeks, people.
Get lumped up tonight. Listen to Rob Rossi and Rocker Mike on the only podcast that I'll hear that won't make me wanna rip off my